Good afternoon. My name is Daria Chernova, and I'm Head of Research here at Australian First Property Development Proprietary Limited. I would like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. As you are all aware, AFPD are currently in the works of a new development in the Gold Coast hinterland. Currently, the project is set to be a development of the land into 100 residential lots. It's come to our attention that the site we have chosen has cultural significance to our local First Nations community, as there is a grandmother tree and stone arrangements currently located on site. As Head of Research, I would like to deliver you with a 15-minute presentation which will aid you as directors in making a well-informed decision about this project, which can benefit both our First Nations community, our company, and our prospective investors. In my presentation, I will cover the significance of the land to the First Peoples, followed by the importance of acknowledging the history and culture in property development, why it's worthwhile to invest in the project and preserve the sacred land, followed by potential consequences for our company and the community if we destroy the land, and finally I'll conclude with suggestions for integrating First Nations history and culture into the project's framework. Culture holds profound importance for the First Nations community, with Indigenous Australian culture dating back as early as 60,000 years. This enduring culture, along with the deep-rooted history of the First Peoples in Australia, designates them as the traditional custodians of their heritage and land. First Nations people share a deep connection with the land, sea, and sky, often referred to collectively as country. Country represents more than just physical land. According to Elder Julie Barlow, it embodies family, life, and connection. And thus, when engaging in projects on culturally significant land, it's essential to recognize that Indigenous connections to the land transcends mere physical features. It encompasses law, place, custom, language, belief, practice, family, and community identity. As noted by the Victorian Aboriginal Heritage Council, the land is not merely a commodity, but a place of belonging that forms the very identity of the First Nations community. Certain natural features, such as grandmother trees and stone arrangements, hold sacred significance for First Nations people. Grandmother trees, revered as ancestral figures, offer profound connection to the land and serve as repositories of community history. Similarly, stone arrangements crafted by ancestors provide insights into Indigenous history and culture, serving as vital links to the past. Despite their cultural importance, these sites lack statutory protections, leaving them vulnerable to the development projects like ours. We have council approval and the legal right to proceed and potentially remove these heritage sites. So, why should we respect this community and this connection to the grandmother tree in the hinterlands, as well as the stone arrangements? Having highlighted the profound significance of the land to the First Peoples, I'd like to pivot to my second point in this presentation: the importance of acknowledging and respecting the history and culture, particularly within the realm of property development. As previously noted, First Peoples culture traces back an estimated 60,000 years, predating British settlement in the 1700s. The vast temporal gap underscores the inherent disconnect between First Peoples and their land, stemming from colonisation. Initially, Australian soil was deemed terra nullius by British settlers, asserting that the land belonged to no one. This doctrine persisted until the High Court's landmark 1992 decision in Mambo No. 2. This invalidated the doctrine and granted First Peoples native title to the land. However, in the context of our project, there are no legal safeguards in place to protect the site, nor are there any avenues for pursuing native title claims. Nevertheless, it remains AFPD's social responsibility to recognise the significance of these heritage sites. As a property development company, we understand that nearly every project entails some degree of land alteration or modification, and ours is no exception. We've witnessed firsthand the adverse impacts of land destruction on communities. Connection to country transcends mere preservation of physical landscapes in the hinterlands. It's about upholding the First People's spiritual connection, identity, and historical roots in the region. This is more than mere title to the land. Disregarding this aspect risks severing the community's spiritual ties to the land and disrupting the intergenerational transmission of culture inherent to these heritage sites. Such actions may catalyze intergenerational trauma and a loss of identity. Australia has been committed to fostering reconciliation with the First Nations people. This responsibility extends not only to the broader public, but also to us as a business, as a company, as property developers. I'd like to summarize this first part of my presentation into 3 convincing points as to why we should preserve the sites. Firstly, the First Nations people are the traditional custodians of the land. This includes ownership over the cultural sites, such as the grandmother tree and the stone arrangements. Secondly, these artifacts foster a spiritual connection to the land, which would ultimately be severed if we were to remove them. And thirdly, not only that, but these artifacts also act as a compass to protect our environment and aid our First Nations community in taking care of country. All of Australia, including our business, is on a mission of reconciliation. It's our social responsibility to preserve culturally significant sites, even where they are not legally protected. Therefore, we should undoubtedly rethink the plans and work around the grandmother tree and the stone arrangements, ultimately continuing with the project but preserving these significant sites. I would now like to turn your attention to the project itself and why I believe that investing in this project is still worthwhile for AFPD whilst preserving the sacred tree and stone. Situated in southeast Queensland along the coast, the Gold Coast exemplifies versatility as a city. With its pristine coastal beaches, diverse residential suburbs, thriving commercial precincts, and serene semi-rural bushlands packed with native wildlife, the Gold Coast offers investors, our investors, and developers a multifaceted landscape to explore and consider for development. Whether we want to develop a beachline skyrise situated right in the heart of surface paradise or a luxury cabin off of Springbrook, the options really are endless. Over the past decade, the Gold Coast region has experienced significant population growth. When we compare 2011 and 2021 census data, we notice a 26% increase in the population for the Gold Coast as a whole. Within the same timeline, the number of households has also grown by 22%. These figures reflect a rising demand for people to purchase properties and make the move to the Gold Coast. So why develop in the hinterlands? Why not take our company in a different direction, somewhere where there's not so many repercussions for destroying significant land? When we take a close look at the hinterlands, we see a 17% rise in population and a 10% increase in the number of households for that same period between 2011 and 2021. Much like the rest of the Gold Coast, the semi-rural bushland areas of the hinterlands are also developing rapidly. I'd like you all to think back to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has fueled migration to the southeast Queensland region. As more individuals seek a lifestyle characterised by stability and spaciousness, rural regions boasting acreages are going to become increasingly sought after in the market. And this shift in lifestyle preference presents a favourable opportunity for developers like AFPD. Consequently, investing in this project holds considerable promise for our company. I'd like to draw your attention to my next point, the potential repercussions that destruction of the grandmother tree and stone arrangements could have on our company. It is crucial to acknowledge that business success transcends mere profitability. It encompasses sustainability. As a business, our foremost commitment should be to deliver optimal outcomes for all stakeholders. Not only investors and shareholders, but also our local First Nations community and the environment. Therefore, as a company specializing in property development, there is a mounting social responsibility for us to balance our interest in the development of the Gold Coast and the prosperity of our company. With the preservation of culturally significant sites sitting at the number one priority for this project. Previous instances of heritage site destruction serve as a cautionary tale. One such example is the devastation of Juukan Gorge, a sacred rock shelter in the Pilbara region of Western Australia. This was done by Rio Tinto, a mining company, in 2020. With a history spanning of over 40,000 years, the destruction of the shelter resulted in a loss of invaluable artifacts, including stone tools, human hair remains, and leaving the Indigenous community devastated. Despite being an industry leader, Rio Tinto's action at Duke and George have harboured widespread backlash for its disregard of Indigenous heritage and cultural significance, which, according to Mark Crowe, the managing director of a marketing consultancy agency, has negatively impacted Rio Tinto's brand strength. And this is in terms of employee, environment, community, and governance scores. The agency has estimated a 5% decrease in Rio Tinto's brand value. Former chief executive of the company, Leon Davis, summarized the consequences of the destruction fairly well, stating that the reputational damage would exceed the value of the iron ore at Duke and Gorge. Thinking back to our project, a probable consequence of destroying the grandmother tree and the stone arrangements will attract adverse consequences, such as a loss of trust from our investors, ultimately impacting profitability and company integrity. Whilst decreased profit is not a promise in this project, adhering to ethical considerations could garner investor support and potentially yield greater profits by preserving this artifact. Looking beyond the consequences that failing to preserve the sites would have on our company, another critical consideration is the impact on First Nations people. As previously mentioned, the Indigenous community maintains a deep connection to the land, including the Gold Coast hinterlands. The destruction of Duke and Gorge left the community devastated, and the cave was a shelter which fostered First Nations people for thousands of years. The cave was a place of occupation and acted as a history book which collected language, custom, and practice for the future generations. Similarly, a separate instance, the felling of a grandmother tree in Muswellbrook, New South Wales, served as another vital connection to the land for the First Nations community. From these instances, we observe an undeniable impact on the First Nations community, a severed connection to country, a lasting loss of identity and culture, contributing to generations more of trauma. In light of these considerations, it's imperative that we carefully weigh the consequences and prioritize responsible decision-making that respects both the environment and the cultural heritage of the First Nations people. The final point I'd like to make is a proposal on how we can integrate our local First Nations community into our project. Prior to moving ahead with the project, it is recommended that we create a new project plan, which will require us to alter the original positioning of the 100 lots to preserve the grandmother tree and the stone arrangements. Engaging with the First Nations community during this process is essential to ensure effective development while honouring the cultural significance. Successful engagement with Indigenous communities hinges on understanding their history, their culture, and contemporary dynamics. According to architect Mark Hromek, Aboriginal knowledge is not just about heritage sites and history, but the knowledge can be used as a framework to create sustainable infrastructure. Hromek worked on a major development in Melbourne, which aimed to remove 18 level crossings and built 2 new train stations in the city. In an interview, Hromek identified 3 key principles from his successful project. He said the project was led by First Peoples. It was community involved and appropriately designed. These principles are certainly transferable to our project, and I implore you to consider them in the future stages of this project. I propose that we firstly consider the 2 principles, so ensuring that the project is led by a First Nations community and that it has sufficient community involvement. In order to build a relationship with the First Peoples, it will be necessary for us to find a point of contact for the community. Currently, the Gelurgal Aboriginal Cultural Centre, located on the Gold Coast, is a direct point of contact to the community and will assist us in preliminary communications. Long-term relationships are built on trust, respect, and transparent communication. Rushed consultations and fragmented departmental arrangements hinder effective engagements. It's important for us to understand the differences in language and communication. These things take time. The third principle, of course, is appropriate design, and this part should come naturally when we involve the First Peoples on the design team. The community will know how best to take care of country and incorporate it into design. Potential alterations that could be made is, of course, reducing the number of lots from 100 to 85, let's say, and making the grandmother tree and stone arrangements a centerpiece amongst the properties. Additionally, elements reflecting the Indigenous culture can be incorporated into the design of the luxury homes themselves, and this will tie in the culturally significant site with the development. At present, the property development has been largely silent on this issue with Indigenous partnerships, indicating that there is a gap to be closed. I trust that I've made a compelling argument for why it's beneficial for our company to invest in this project while also safeguarding the grandmother tree. As directors, your next course of action should be to involve the First Nations people in the project. Thank you for joining me today.